Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I am going to talk about a citizen's participation perspective on the use of blockchain in public governance. And I think it's a general assumption that we can say that citizens' engagement is necessary for a healthy democracy. And this is a short presentation, and the idea is to have the possibility to discuss some questions that I have launched and some questions or any question that you want to take up. But the general issue for this presentation is how we can improve citizen participation and engagement in the public governance. And the delimitation now is that the focus is on the legislative branch of governance. I will not talk about other branches like the public services, executive, and so on. So this is only the direct citizens' participation in the legislative part. And this is three things. The current problems, we will look into some use cases, which is the main part, and then the discussion, which comes at the end, but we have plenty of time to discuss. Okay, just to sum up, I won't go very deep into this, but there are many current problems today with a low rate of political participation in elections. There is lower and lower trust in the public administration. And just an example, the last one, I like that one because it's a study from a youth perspective. And this 55% of the millennials want to participate in municipal governments, but only 17% think that the governments are listening. So I think that's actually a big problem. We're going to look into three use cases: voting, smart participation, and liquid democracy. Okay, blockchain voting. Blockchain voting is not like electronic voting. Blockchain voting it's much more. Okay, of course we can vote digitally on mobile, PC, and so on, but we can also see if our vote has been registered. We can see for what the vote has been registered. We can vote for different alternatives in specific areas or questions. We can rank alternatives. We can vote conditionally, and we can change our vote until deadline. These are possibilities, not necessarily everything has to be implemented. And of course, apart from what I'm going to discuss, a really big and important issue is the cybersecurity, the immutability, and so on blockchain. But I won't go into that because I think it's obvious for any of these use cases. So these are functionalities that are possible. Just two examples. In Zurich, and the elections in 2018, we had 220 residents in Zug with digital identities. 77 took part in the vote between June 25 and July 1st. 95 responded to the city's survey. They made a survey after. And the findings were that 79% welcome blockchain-based e-votes, and 2% are opposed to it. 52% agree that e-voting should be introduced to make voting easier and quicker than filling out a ballot. And 21% believe that blockchain technology makes electronic voting more secure, and only 60%, or almost the same number, have security concerns. Another famous example, I'm just taking these two ones. These are, I think, the most representative ones, and then we can discuss more. In West Virginia, the results, they made two elections with blockchain. This is a state in the United States. West Virginia implemented a blockchain-based voting app for the first time on a platform called Votes. The first tested in 2 counties during the primary earlier this year. 13 people used the app to vote in the primaries. After that technologically successful test, it was used during the midterm election at a wider scale, and 150 votings were made from 24 of the 55 counties in the general midterm, and majority deployed military members. And now this this platform is going to be used in Colorado and many other places. A short reflection. We have elections in May, and from we can see that there is an amendment from on the 76 Electoral Act that says that member state may provide for the possibilities electronic and internet voting. So this is legislatively correct, okay? And when they do so, they should adopt measures and so on. That's okay, security, reliable, and so on. And this is the list of the countries where we will hold elections. And there's only one country, that permits e-voting. Okay, we can make the conclusions, everyone, for themselves. I don't know. I know what I think. I think it's yeah. Let's say this for the discussion at the end. Okay, but it's surprising if you want to be a part of the world that adapts modern technology. There's only one place, one country with I think 1.8 million members or citizens that permits e-voting. That's good. That's good. Really, really positive thinking. I like that. Okay. So, like blockchain voting, we can take up. You can comment now if you want to do it, or we can pick it up at the end. But I think one of the biggest strengths for this voting is it's easier to participate. It's faster and more accessible because we know that the population in Europe is aging. A lot of people don't have physical possibility to go and vote in person, and other people have other concerns. Not going to vote and participate in voting physically, but actually that you can vote from an electronic device would make it more accessible. We also have the potential to implement more and new functionalities. Okay, that's the ones that I listed in the beginning. Those are not necessary, but those are possibility to improve engagement, improve the possibility to pick different alternatives and do a more selective voting. The weakness, of course, there's a cybersecurity risk and a risk of vote buying. Okay, not that so complex, which our colleague presented earlier, but of course, I mean, I would say not only in that complex way. There's also easier ways to do vote buying if you have a personal device. The second use case is smart participation. And that's normally through a different kind of platform for citizen participation, where you can normally vote for proposals concerning budgets, projects, legislation, and so on. Well, okay, not only vote, of course, propose and so on. Collection of ideas, forums for discussion, etc. Two examples. Better Reykjavik. Reykjavik is the capital of Iceland. And they have a consultative project of the city of Reykjavik, and it's an online forum where the citizens are given the chance to present their ideas of services and operations and vote for them and so on. And anyone can view these open forums, but you have to register to participate. And this is run by Citizens Foundation called citizens.is. And when idea is presented, it's considered a public property when anybody presents an idea on this platform. And the original idea can change considerably. And the city owns the right to that idea. Okay, once you publish it, you give away your right to the idea. And the city considers these ideas crowdsources. And every month, they select the top 5 rated ideas, and they are processed in the appropriate standing committee. And in addition, the top-rated idea in each category is addressed in the appropriate standing committee also, and the different categories are for tourism, operations, recreation and leisure, sports, human rights, arts and culture, education, transportation, planning, administration, environment, welfare, and various. And lesser-rated ideas are kept as guidelines and future ideas. The next example is Decidim, no hablo catalán. I don't speak Catalan, but I think it means this, Barcelona decides. Okay, and that's a platform for participatory democracy also. And the aim is to have a user-friendly, mobile-first, etc. platform and to make democracy more accessible. And the areas are strategic city and district planning, the elaboration of new participation regulation, urban projects, the management of municipal infrastructure, citizen initiatives for population consultation, participatory budget, or the design of public policies and so on. And since February 2016, 28,500 people have joined the platform. There have been more than 12,000 proposals, 190,000 votes, and 9,000 proposals have been turned into public policy so far. These are public data. I really doubt the last one, but I think it's actually copied from the website, so I had to review it. But those are official data, okay? And smart participation with blockchain, strengths and weaknesses. Like strength, they reach more participants, the more diverse and inclusive processes than non-online platforms. They increase transparency, facilitates collaborative work and networking, and works as a citizen sensor. And weaknesses are, of course, as all of these cases, the security, and also important, the digital divide. It's not representative, always, okay? Difficulties in deliberation, and facilitator, but it's not, it doesn't by itself create more motivated and participative citizens. The third use case is called liquid democracy, and liquid democracy is a direct democracy. In direct democracies, participants must vote personally on all issues, while in the current representative democracies, participants vote for representatives once in a certain election cycle. In Europe, every 5 years. So liquid democracy is a 21st century upgrade for democratic decision making that blends the best, that's what the people that sell this concept say, that blends the best of direct and representative systems into a smarter and more accountable combination. And the digital democracy, or democracy 3.0, is a solution based on blockchain. Or could be, and when it is, that's what I will present. By adopting liquid democracy, we can empower our most trustworthy leaders, give ourselves true choice and accountability, and transform our politics and society. And it works in a rather simple way. Every citizen, like in a direct democracy, has one vote, okay, like this. But voters can also, at any time, delegate their vote to another voter. So you can here use what's called proxies. You delegate your vote to this person that gets this one, and his own, and get 3 votes, okay? And this delegation can be specific for one question, or it could also be to a certain category of questions, like economy or health and so on, or even include all votes, okay? But the voters can also, even if you give away for a period all your votes or to a proxy, you can also revoke just a single question or all the questions at any given time. So this is the shape of the liquid democracy, where we could actually vote on questions ourselves, delegate to this one, that delegates to the other one, etc. So we can delegate our questions to be solved to anyone we trust, okay? Or think that represent us. 2 examples. These 2 examples, there are no example from Europe. This kind of economy or democracy have been used internally, maybe mainly by the famous Pirate Party that was active earlier in the 10 years ago, more or less, and specifically in Germany they use this a lot. But Liquid US is a platform for liquid democracy, and it's working, it's online, and it's functioning. And this is a use case this is a use case that doesn't fully implement liquid democracy, because we can understand that to change to not use any directive selected members to be in the government is really, or in the parliament, is really difficult to work. So this is they are showing a way to do this without any legislative changes and so on. So what they do, that anybody can become a liquid democracy run for them as a party, okay, or as a representative. So if you get voted, the voted person promises to take all the decisions based on this liquid democracy platform. Okay, so on this platform you can put yourself up as a representative. The users can vote for the questions, or they can give them to any of these representatives they want. And this is more or less this is a simulation of how it would work. This is an example of a liquid democracy politician. Okay, was running for California 1 year ago. He didn't get elected because it was 2 persons, so he didn't get more than 50%. He got a lot less. But he was a politician that promised to take all his decisions based on this liquid US platform. Okay, we will be more or less like this. Okay, this is just an illustration and way they work to implement this with the current situation. Okay. Another one, famous one, is Flux, is in Australia. They have had 24 candidates in the last elections, and I think none of them got into the parliament. But this shows that these are moments going on, and I think it's an interesting thing to have in mind that our current democratic election of representatives every 4 or 5 or 3 years is not the only model possible, especially if we want to strengthen participation in elections and strengthen the citizens' participation. And just as a conclusion here, I think also that this is not possible without modern technology. And something we invented 250 years ago, which is the representative democracy, is not written in stone. That has to be that way, but we can actually reconsider these kind of models. I put up some kind of questions, some questions that we can discuss. I open for a discussion about anything of these subjects that you want to comment, reflections, comments, critiques, discussion. My idea has mainly been to put up this as a platform for reflection, and I think it's really worth to continue to discuss this. And if there is anybody has a comment, anybody thinking about being a liquid democracy politician, anybody who is against electronic voting or for electronic voting based on blockchain, a political party or voting? Voting. So you would like to have electronic voting based on blockchain? We have another.
Yeah, does it work? Yeah. So every time I've heard of this liquid democracy concept in general, it's usually building on some very dramatic assumptions of rational economic behavior. That I think we can all agree is not very often that it actually happens in the wild. So if you institute liquid democracy and people start becoming micro tyrants, what's going to happen?
I think I will be provocative. And they aren't today. Huh? Our politicians aren't micro tyrants today.
Well, yeah, sure.
What's the difference?
Well, the difference is we at least know the devil here.
And sorry, I can't hear you. I have to say. I think we noted that. I think your question is really good, and but you will be responsible if you're a liquid politician. You will be responsible for what actually the decisions you take. But people say, "Oh, I don't like that guy. I revoke my votes and I vote for this one," in 1 second, and that you can now take 5 years in Europe. So it's I think the speed of society is so fast.
But sure.
We really have to adapt our systems to.
What are you doing right now?
I think you can. Can you hear? You have to.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. So what you're doing right now is that you're performing a rational evaluation of your, let's say, profit and loss in a certain scenario, right? And you voted for a guy and he promised you X and you got Y, so now you won't vote for him anymore. What if that guy had convinced you to follow him because he had some kind of cultish attraction over you, which I think, looking at society, it happens quite a lot, right? It's not just, I mean, that's not even a question, right? So knowing that, right, giving away the power of democracy to the people, it makes me a little bit scared because I think that there's going to be a million Donald Trumps running around and telling people a bunch of stuff about refugees and making them really scared, and they're going to get he's going to get their votes, and then decision power will be effectively decentralized onto a network of agents that have no idea what's best for them. So that's my concern. I mean, could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, but that's what I wanted a response to.
Yeah. No, if anybody wants to comment on this, or you want to comment?
I think liquid democracy is a brilliant concept because when we have referendums, we have low voter participation, and here we can have representatives vote if people are not interested, and people voting if they are interested. So I think it's a perfect match. And well, we always have the risk that people will follow some idiots. Now they vote for them, and with liquid democracy, they vote for them as well. So there's no difference. And whereas I have some trouble with e-voting, blockchain-based, because it's not receipt-free. So meaning that you can buy votes and people can prove what they have voted for. And this is something that, to my knowledge, has not been resolved yet. So, maybe
They can prove themselves what they voted for.
Yeah, they can prove for themselves what they voted for, and then they can prove it to somebody else as well.
Yeah, but you can today still.
No, today you can't. You can't tell
here,
people, I sell you my vote, I will vote for your party, but then you vote secretly for somebody else.
Yeah.
So basically, your vote cannot be effectively bought. But with this kind of receipt, your vote can be bought. Maybe it's not the most important problem, but it's still a problem that's not been resolved.
There's a possibility also not to make it possible to show what you voted for in blockchain. There's a functionality that you can read what your vote has been registered for. There's a possibility not to do it.
But is it still then secure, or is this something that is needed for security reasons?
No, it's an option. It's a political option or participatory option and so on. So it's not an. I'm sorry. Here.
I will have 3 points, and these are 3 reflections, so they're not statements. But I think that politics is a vision, as it was highlighted, and it's based on promises, but based on hopes that you can leverage and that you can bring people to vote for. So, and sometimes promises are unmeetable because they are too high level, or you don't have budget, or simply they don't qualify to be meetable projects. But liquid democracy is ranking against performance. So do we really want to rank politicians against performance, or do we want another message to be passed? First question. Second thing, it's linked to what you were saying, secret voting. There are a number, I'm talking about Europe, but there are a number of member states where vote is secret, and it has to be secret, mainly for compromises and bribery reasons. And I'm asking, could blockchain become a mean of repression if you haven't voted for this, because someone will be able to verify this? And second thing, how would you ensure that your real identity that you are the people that is meant to vote, and you're not voting twice for your brother on your brother's identity? And third thing, related to engagement and participation of people, we have seen that engagement in social media and on social media through social networking was very visible and very highlighted and very positive at the beginning. We are also seeing that all participants, not all, but I would say a majority of participants on social media do use social media as covering when they are there in their identities under anonymity to relate hate speech or to relate fake news. So would this be really a mean to engage better citizens for a better democracy, or there are still many limitations that we have to drive from the examples that you put, that you selected? Many things.
I totally agree. I think they're good reflections. I'm bringing this up. I think it's important that we bring it up to discuss it, because we won't solve the problem here today. But I think we have to talk more openly about it. I think you say you're worried about, I understand that, for example, but the way democracy is working today, I'm really worried. I'm worried about it. I think it doesn't work. I think the way we choose our representatives, first we choose every 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then actually we choose them and they promise and make their promises, political programs and so on, but they don't even vote generally. It's the party that vote. The top of the party decide, and we haven't voted those. How they going to vote? So I think the system it's not a representative democracy today. We can call it what we want, but it's not. I mean, a person that you'd select in general, politicians, it's very, very difficult. Okay, I love my mother. She was a politician. She was in the Swedish Parliament for two legislations. But I wouldn't want her to take decision about healthcare, public education, national defense. It's so complex, so difficult. I think any member of the parliament, any parliament is capable. And then we say, no, we vote like our party, but then it's not a democracy. So that's my issue. I think we should really question and criticize the way this works. I know it's really difficult to change it, but I think this is one model to step by step with the liquid candidates. I don't think we have to do it, but we should discuss.
Are average people more qualified to take decisions? I mean, just look at Brexit. I'm sorry.
Look at
Brexit. What was the question on the table?
I don't know if they're qualified, but are the politicians in the UK qualified? They think the same. You see, I think. But it's really easy to criticize the population. I think the population is more qualified in many cases to take decisions than the politicians. In many, not in all. In many. And many is a range that is wide. So I say many. Yeah. No.
Thank you. I would like to add the remarks on these. Perhaps it's a question of the topic we're talking about. So there are certain topics that are, for example, defense, strategic topics that are based on asymmetrical information in my judgment. So for those topics, liquid democracy would be very dangerous, I believe, because, I mean, decentralizing the decision power, not only somehow it changes the accountability principle, but also you should also keep people with the information that one of the times is classified to take the decision. So I believe that there are certain topics for which liquid democracy can be a good instrument. So, for example, topics related to a local community, to like public policy relating really to a city or even in a small context. But other areas such as national strategic interests, defense, that I think liquid democracy will be dangerous, if not useless.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Stefan. Very nice. My question, today we talk about governance, and although I think your ideas are very interesting, you don't mention much about the governance surrounding your liquid democracy. Is that for a reason, because it's implicitly already there, or is it something that you haven't thought of, or can you help me to understand?
I'm sorry, but there is the reason is that I limited the limitations was on the second slide, that this is only concerning the selective part. Okay, it's not about running the democracy and so on. But there's actually a paper published by the observatory about governance. So I don't want to overlap that, because that discussion have been done. I don't say that it should not be done, but I think the focus here was really more on the citizen participation in that part, not the executive part. So that's the reason why I didn't bring up anything. But this is really an area of my interest also. So, okay, so that's the reason.
Okay, maybe it brings me to your, because I think what you bring up is maybe part of the governance that you would like to implement if you have a liquid democracy, to ensure that the proper decision taking process is still there. These are things I can think of. So I think it's still, even though there is another paper, I still think it's a very relevant topic.
Can I also, so Lucas Aper, European Commission, can I come back to the example of Zug, because it was not about liquid democracy, it's about classic direct democracy, as Switzerland has been applying over the last 500 years, and it's just taking it a step forward by digitizing it and making it easier and frictionless to have more votes on issues that directly concern people. And I think that's the key really to making most use of this technology, is to use these tools where people can make a meaningful judgment. And that's very often at the communal level, whether you decide whether you want to switch off the light during the night to save energy and use the money for something else? That's a straightforward question, which everybody understands and can easily take a vote on, and let the people have a direct vote on that. I think it makes sense for Zug to have it. If we think about the federal level, where complex decisions are taken, which weapon system should we choose this year for the next 25 years to defend our airspace, where you have a complex tender procedure, a process that takes 15 years, I doubt that this is the thing that you want to put into liquid democracy and push a button and see what comes out of it, whether you buy the American defense system or a Swedish Saab that is a bit upgraded with a bit of something. I mean, that is a decision where you want to have a committee of experts that advises a politician who has voted for that. So with any technology, the technology is great, but you have to find the right use case. And I think it is at a communal level rather than at these complex questions that are budget of an entire country or weapon system, defense system.
Okay. Should we
vote for?
Yeah.
Should we proceed with your proposal?
Okay, just I think we're done with this part. Okay, oh, did you have a question? No.
Okay, one question on the blockchain for public service delivery. So basically, you have not citizen engagement in public service delivery. So
not service delivery. Okay.
But no, I know. But there's an issue to what extent there is accountability, transparency in the delivery of social services. So it's a different use case.
Totally.
Exactly, but it's about citizen-centric government and how basically governments could use this not just for voting, but for empowering citizens to provide feedback on the delivery of services.
Exactly.
So is that and actually my question is, what is different? Because the Reykjavik, so as is shown, in Iceland, they crowdsourced their constitution before blockchain. So about, I think, 30% of the population participated in the writing of a new law, constitution, through electronic media. But what is so unique then about blockchain? What I'm saying, it's not the blockchain which makes the difference, but the socioeconomic context in the country. This is possible in Reykjavik and in Barcelona because they had many, many years of different experiences of participatory budgeting and civic engagement. So what is so unique about blockchain then?
Absolutely. I just showed two cases of citizens' participation with these kind of platforms that are blockchain-based, because these platforms that they use are blockchain-based. And blockchain-based platforms add, for example, that they're immutable. So a political party that comes in, if there is a change, for example, let's say in Barcelona, they can just erase everything and say, no, we won't work with this anymore. But we have many proposals, or they can manipulate it, or they can go into it and read it through a traditional centralized database. So it's supposed to be more cyber secure, etc. So blockchain add those traditional values to these kind of platforms. So I didn't pretend to say that blockchain is the solution, and but it's applied in these kind of cases like the voting and so on. So it was not. Maybe I should have described that better. It's not like blockchain only used, but there is concerning these public services. There is an excellent report from the observatory about governmental services. So that we produced, Ludwig. Maybe you can at the end indicate on the website or something where you can download these kind of reports, because that's an excellent report about governance public service concerning all that other part that we are discussing, that you can empower the citizens and participatory and so on. But this was directly about that other part. So, okay, I don't think that these are the. I'm sorry. Yeah. No, I just think that the time is running out. You should decide, or we had two questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. Chaiwu from Blockchain Awareness. I love your idea of liquid democracy, but working here at a national level, we noticed that our most our biggest problem is to get citizens involved, actually, even when there is something at stake. So we try to get in touch with citizens who say, okay, there is something that is really meaningful to you. Maybe you should come in local committees, for instance, to decide whether you want that road closed or not, a new building to be built or not. And most of them, they just don't feel concerned, even for very specific and realistic topics. So we are not able to get them involved. So my question is, be it blockchain or any other voting systems, how do we maybe not incentivize, but how do we get people involved? Is there a solution within blockchain or whatever technology to get more consent from people about voting systems? Thank you.
Really interesting, yeah. These topics should definitely be discussed, and we should learn more about it. I think there was one last question here.
Maybe real quick, Tom Lyons from Consensus and the Observatory. Just to your bullet point number 3, and this goes back to the point from before. Why is, because I'm based in Switzerland, and this conversation comes up a lot, and there's a lot of skepticism around e-voting. And one of the problems is people don't know to trust the system. So an argument for blockchain is that you have this decentralized trust, you have this auditable stuff. Those of us in the blockchain industry, we understand that trust is there. But how can we get regular citizens to believe it? Because to the average person, it's the same black box as the black box that the government gives you. So I think that's one of the issues that doesn't, that I think we need to talk about in this context as well.
Yeah, I really totally agree. Really important. Okay, just tell you that these weren't my ideas. That I'm just a transmitter and trying to structure these ideas for these presentations. These ideas about blockchain, blockchain, of course, but liquid democracy, voting, and so on. Those are not my ideas. I present them. And I think we should just try to bring them up and to discuss these kind of issues. And you have my contact details below. And thanks a lot and anything I would be happy to have get feedback to continue to discuss these kind of issues. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. I hope that the fruitful conversation will continue. Bear with us. So we are switching to the 2 working sessions. The first one being really about summarizing a bit what has been discussed during the whole day, trying to identify what are the elements and best practices that we have heard during the day and what framework that we can come up with together. So this is the first element, and we are going to do that having a look at both the project governance and the protocol governance in order with the questions that were raised already this morning. Again, these working sessions are very participatory. We are on here to present a few slides that are here to give context and kickstart conversations. So please feel free to raise your voice. This is your conversations. You are the experts. Also, if there are people in the back who want to join us here, feel free to do so. We are here all together. It's not a cycle, but we can pretend that it is one. Let's start. Yeah.
I think you don't know what project you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think you should set some context.
Sure.
So in the context of this discussion, what kind of project are we talking about?
Yeah.
And in that context, we can start framing project governance and protocol governance.
Yeah, sure.
Blockchain project.
So as you are raising this point, I would propose to go directly to this particular slide so that we can start this conversation.
Okay, so I think when we are talking about a project, we wanted to cover all kind of blockchain-based projects, but maybe with a little focus at the beginning on business, not only business-oriented project, but actually any kind of blockchain project. And The first thing we wanted to talk about was the key element of governance. When we talk about governance, what are we taking into account? What kind of question do we need to raise? What is governance? And we try to summarize that by creating some category with the important element of governance. So we talk about legal, membership status, authority, and organizational, who cover a large key element of governance. What kind of a legal entity for setting up the governance? Who can take the decision? Who owns the IP? All these kind of questions that a member of a project who want to start a blockchain project, but actually any kind of project should ask themselves before starting. So my first question is, I would like maybe to challenge this element and see if there is something important that we missed when we try to make this broad category, and see if what are the priority elements that need to be solved before starting a project. Like the key element was a project cannot start if we didn't set up the governance regarding these key elements. So
the first thing I think upon is to decide how to decide.
So I think it might be helpful to narrow down the discussion, because if I want to create my own blockchain startup, the ideal governance model that I'm going to choose is not the same as if we want to run European government services on a blockchain. So I think in the context of, we are having this discussion in the context of the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum. And so we're having this discussion primarily in the context of either the European Union or governments or municipalities wanting to run some form of public services on some kind of blockchain network, either for the delivery of blockchain of public services or for some kind of citizen governance. And I think while this still leaves many options and possible models within that scope, I think it still narrows down the scope in a way that we can have a meaningful conversation. So I think let's tackle those discussions in the context of, again, public entities setting up a blockchain network for some form of public services.
And in this context, I will add that there is more value to a blockchain when there is several actors. We can think about a model where there will be like a government blockchain run by a government entity, but we can also consider that in many cases there will be many actors joining a blockchain. So it's why we need to consider this question of governance. What will be the role of the government entity? And sorry, someone was talking about the fact of deciding about how to decide. Sorry.
Let's start again. So you're making decisions already, but there is a fuzzy front end. There is a long period where parties just talk to each other without having a governance, where they have to decide how to build the governance. So the first thing you have to do is to decide how to decide. Do you go, everybody has an equal vote? You go for a qualified majority? I don't know, but it's a decision that has to be made up front. And I think you should make 3 stages or 3 levels. You have your technical layer, your blockchain, where you need a governance, which is more technically inspired. Then for your project, whether it's a public entity or private-public collaboration, you have a pre-production phase where other parties could collaborate, where you have to decide on marketing, on legal, on regulatory items. And then there is a post-production phase where hopefully some sort of business case is realized, where you also need a governance that should be able to extend or expand or scale the entire project. So my question is, which governance are we discussing? Is it the purely technical layer? Will it be private blockchain, a public Ethereum or whatever? Do we need to discuss that governance? Is it prior to production or after production?
So I think we focus on 2 things. It's because there is no so many projects who are the stage or running, and but for me the post-production and pre-production question are a bit similar. So we decide to divide in 2 parts. The first part we'll talk about the governance of the project, meaning the governance the relationship between the members, the choice concerning the vision of the project. But we'll have a second part, we'll focus on the protocol governance. How do you choose what kind of technology, what kind of blockchain, permissionless? So we'll have a focus on the second time. I should have precised it before. Good. And for coming back on what you say, do you think you need to create 3 layers of governance who are all set up at the beginning? You already consider what will be the governance between the actors later? Or is it something that you change with time and it's evolving with time?
I think it will evolve over time and there is no golden standard. I think we haven't done this that much before to actually derive how it should be done, so it's a bit trial and error. But what I do know is that having governance up front actually helps to deliver the process or the project, mainly because you can build on a shared vision and then people can start to work on the shared vision without having to rely on their own mother company for decisions. If you just have to go back to your own company always whenever a decision has to be made, you will make decisions based on the strategy of your company, which is not always in the interest of the project. So the first thing to build should be a shared vision of where the idea should go through, but that's the most difficult thing to realize, I think, as most likely you won't start with all the parties acquired to actually build your vision. So it will evolve over time.
Okay. Other remark?
Well, depends on the use case of public or permission blockchain. If you have a permission blockchain, usually you have a legal entity, and then it makes sense to structure the governance, the technical governance of the system of the blockchain in a similar manner than the governance of the entity. So who has a stake in the company or in the association or whatever entity you have should have a similar stake in the technical system, then you can be sure that the decisions align and the legal decisions and the technical decisions are done in parallel and do not contradict so much. When you have a public system, usually you don't have a legal entity, and then you run the risk that any kind of court can overturn your governance decision, which might bring you in very complicated territory. Imagine you have a governance decision and you have different courts in different countries overturning it in a different way. This can be quite complicated, and I haven't got a solution for it right now.
But then wouldn't that mean that you need a legal entity regardless? I mean, I agree. Like right now, if you look at the protocol level, those networks are not governed by any kind of legal entity. But then what you're saying, doesn't that imply that even if you were to run some kind of deliveries, some kind of services delivered over a public network, you would have to form a legal entity to make sure that the legal basis for the relationships that you have with users is based on some form of contracts that they sign prior to using the services?
Well, the legal entity in a global environment does not give you a full guarantee for consistency either. So a decision of the legal entity in one country might not be recognized by the courts of a different country. At the same time, maybe you don't want to have a legal entity. You want to have a really public blockchain. And then we rather have to ask lawmakers to tell us the rules for governance so that they are able to respect this kind of governance. Like we respect arbitration. We say if you comply with certain rules, you can have an arbitration entity which decides, and then our courts will respect this decision and will not interfere but will execute this decision. And this kind of thinking, this kind of functionality, we also need for blockchains. So we need to have a kind of a governance standard saying if you comply with this kind of governance standard, meaning that governance is fair, the right actors are involved, and the procedure is transparency and meets certain criteria, then we should recognize these decisions and do not interfere with courts. But of course, this needs a convention and will not be there unless we can agree on this kind of convention.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. But one thing is that in the case of Alastria, which is a public permissioned network, an association, then we have all of these questions, but then also the legal liabilities, okay? Because then you have companies running, you have the association, we can have the governance. The association doesn't really run or operate the network. The network is spontaneously created by the members because they agree on the standards and so on. But then there may be a case where, and we don't know because there's not anything similar to that, where we are liable for any, let's say, damages happening in the network, even though Alastria doesn't run the network, because of some governance decisions, okay? And this is something that we have studied a lot, and then there are many lawyers that we have also created a report. We think we are going to open this, okay? But there are things that we still don't know and we are investigating, because this liability is between the governance model of an association and the real production network. When you have real economic transactions and then many disputes can happen there, we don't really know what is going to happen in the future, okay? Because this is something that doesn't exist in the world, by the way. So legal liabilities, I would put this here for this specific type of networks, because I think that we are not going to be alone, okay? So this is going to be a type of network which is very wide.
It's actually exactly the next question, I think, for the two last comments. So I think the question is, when you have a public body or government taking part or setting a blockchain, what kind of legal entity or non-legal entity apparently you choose for running a blockchain and setting up the governance? We can see that in many blockchain projects, when there is no necessary public body involved, it mainly takes the form of a partnership, just a contract with no creation of legal entity, and this partnership would just set up the basic governance, but it's most of the time for early projects. But in many business-oriented projects, it's more creation of a legal entity who will run the blockchain and the project. And we have some kind of middle way where, like in ADBA, probably like an association or a foundation. Jesus said earlier that it's better to create, to maybe make a choice of a non-profit entity when you want to be inclusive and gather a lot of different actors. And we have another opinion who said, like, maybe when there is a public entity, then we should not be like a legal entity. It should just be kind of by using the network with control by a public body, you just accept the rule of the contract with the public body, and you not necessarily have the government is running the chain, and you don't have a governance body. So I would like to maybe go deeper in that. And so if there is a public body involved, maybe with other industrial actor or maybe alone, what should be the better legal entity to set up the governance and create a framework for this blockchain or this network?
So maybe this is a good question for you, Jesus. I think that what I'm sorry to direct this with you, but basically what you are trying to create is a network that will ultimately also include public actors and public entities. And so I think that the question here is, what is the best legal entity when it comes to interacting with these different actors? And what is the level of integration that we have to come up with to interact with these public bodies?
So I cannot pretend that I know the answer, okay, because I think nobody knows the answer for the future. But for the moment, what we have seen is that a non-profit association for this type of network, public permission, where we want to be inclusive not only of private entities but also the public administrations, is working very well, okay, because we already have nodes being run by public administrations. Why? Because they have even private consortiums, okay, for some things, but whenever they want to participate and collaborate with the private sector, the network has to be hybrid, okay? So having a non-profit is very good for this, okay? But then you have other sorts of problems, okay? But then look at also the possible future of EBSI, okay? So EBSI starts as a public administrations only network, but with the willingness to be open to the private sector. I don't think we know right now how this will work, okay? But the ideal association for me, and this is just my opinion, it's not Alastria, okay? Would be Alastria with not just regular nodes from public administrations, but validator nodes. I mean, the nodes executing the consensus are the ones who provide the trust on the network. And we need that the set of validator nodes are as heterogeneous as possible, because the idea is that the trust depends on the fact that the validators don't collude with each other to harm any other member of the association. So we need public administrations, private companies, NGOs, civil associations, and then the best legal, let's say, entity, at least for the moment, is a non-profit association. Another thing is that maybe there should be some modifications to the current legal structure of non-profits in Spain, at least, okay? Because I think that we need another legal entity which is not existent right now, okay?
So jumping on that, I perfectly understand what you're saying when it comes to having a network that is run by a lot of different types of actors. So how do you manage to have these different types of actors involved when they have different incentives? So just to take a few examples linked to the EBSI. So member states have a clear incentive into being part of the validation of what is happening in the network. Government agencies can also have a strong incentive to be part of it. Some the biggest private entities would have also an incentive, but when it comes to the others, how do we make sure that they are incentivized into participating to this validation?
Well, right now the incentivization, and again, I cannot pretend to know everything, is working very well, because at the end, it's something that I said in the morning. All the entities in Alastria have the same common objective, is to build the roads. Because without the roads, I cannot gain money. Without the roads, I cannot provide public services. Without the roads, I cannot provide anything, okay? So we need the roads. So they are incentivized. Now, having said that, running validator nodes requires some resources and money and so on, and then you can see that the companies and entities willing to run these validator nodes, they have resources. So it's not as inclusive as it would be desired, where everybody could run such a node, but given the conditions, objective conditions, then what we are building is a set of nodes which are very heterogeneous, but at the end, you see big companies, then and probably some public administrations, but you don't see very, very small startups because they don't have the resources to do this. But I would say that if they could, they would participate, because everybody wants to be part of this because they are building the roads. And by the way, everybody wants to be at the center of the new digital economy of Spain, which is good for them, okay, at least for marketing.
Lucas, again, I think the choice of the legal structure will depend essentially on two things. So the first one is liability. What type of liability do the parties to the corporation want to expose themselves to? That very much depends in practice the choice of the legal form. And the second one is what type of incentives do you want to give the key people that should bring the project forward, and that's something that you have already mentioned. I think it's very important. You give people a very different incentive if you have a for-profit corporation where you give employees a stock option on the outcome of the delivery of the company than you would give to people that participate in the INATPA next to their daily jobs without being remunerated and do this on a pro bono basis, basically. That's it's a very different incentive. And the incentive will depend on what you ultimately want to achieve. So an association like INAPTA, which should bring the industry together with regulators or set common standards, will have to create trust between people that usually compete with one another. So the setup must be one that gives this trust. And that depends very much on the legal structure and on the governance, which has to be constructed that everybody has a say in a very democratic manner. While in a for-profit company such as IBM, you would never think that decisions on a business basis are taken in a very democratic manner. They have to be taken quickly, it has to be up to the market, it has to work. So two things, legal structure depends on liability, your appetite for absorbing liability, and the second one is what incentives do you want to give the people to move forward. That's my personal opinion.
So I have another question about that. Sorry, you are first.
I think your structure works well for Alastria because it's still a permissioned network. And basically, the decentralization of control does not work via the blockchain, but does work via the association. So you have a decentralized legal entity where you centralize power through a certain process and then exercises on a blockchain. I think for a really public blockchain, permissionless, this is not something you should do because then you still have one entity, one legal entity controlling the system, and you should have a foundation, but it should not be the foundation controlling the blockchain, but the blockchain controlling the foundation. So, for example, the blockchain governance could decide whether to finance the foundation. And the foundation will be financed if people are happy with the foundation. If people are not happy with the foundation anymore, then the financing should go somewhere else. And this way, the blockchain will finance a foundation that will take care of development services, of community offerings, etc. So there will be a foundation that is caring about important things for the blockchain, but it will not own or control the blockchain. Of course, then we are running into the trouble of liability because legal entities are there to shield liability. And if we haven't got a legal entity, the technical shielding of liability is weak in the long run. You can participate anonymously and maybe shield your liability this way, but it might not work in the long run.
All right, thank you very much. So after those initial considerations, I think let's try and narrow down even further the scope of the discussion so that we can have the views of all of you here, some of which are experienced builders and participants in consortiums. And so let's take very explicitly the case of the so-called European blockchain, right? So the European Commission has articulated an intent to deploy some form of European blockchain, right? So which would be a permission network run and operated by the member states, on top of which we could run a number of applications related to the delivery of government services. Specific examples of such services have been mentioned in the past. So one of them could be the registry of, so commercial registry, so enterprise identity and the data associated with moral persons throughout the European Union. So that's one example that was taken. A second set of applications that was mentioned was everything around diplomas, certifications, verifiable claims associated with either moral or physical persons. And so let's imagine, right, that we want to deploy such a network in a permission context to run those applications. And then with that in mind, let's try to outline your views on how that could run. Right? So how should it be structured? Should it be structured as the European Union simply launching a bid and asking providers to offer a platform as a service that would run those services? Or should this be structured as the actual member states running servers in their respective countries and participating in the network? Should this be run as a utility, paid for on a per transaction basis? Should this take a legal form? And if yes, what kind of legal form? You may or may not have views on all those questions. We're very interested in starting with those assumptions within the context of the project that I described.
One question, and what is the use case for this blockchain? Is it only for use by the member states or for use by everybody?
Yeah, if you take the examples that I just mentioned, they are related to government services, but they are only meaningful if a broad swath of economic actors is able to either write or access the data. So I just take two examples. Enterprise identity. Why do we talk about enterprise identity? Because enterprises need to justify who they are whenever they want to register for government services, but also when they want to open a bank account, pay their salaries, file social benefits for their employees. And so there are a number of informations related to enterprises that only the government can produce. But then there are many actors throughout society who might need those this authenticated information to perform certain transactions. Similarly, if you take the examples of diplomas and professional certifications, there are probably tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of educational institutes throughout Europe who each generate diplomas with various degrees of authentication, and there are millions of employers throughout the European Union who might need to consult those certifications in order to hire someone. So we're talking about use cases that are anchored into some form of government-approved documents, but that should be used by a very large number of participants.
Can I ask, before we delve into this, can I ask one question? You mentioned permissioned European blockchain. Can you elaborate on why you need a blockchain?
Just mentioning briefly a couple of the other use cases, which are RegTech, and its sharing of value-added tax and customs excise data between the member states. The proof of concept that our colleagues in the tax area made saw a 30% savings per member state and 70% savings at the EU level, and a much more rapid sharing of the data than sending big packages of data, which then were processed and archived by each member state, often in separate ways. So it's partially efficiency, but then we look forward to the future. There will be a public-private partnership. This is foreseen in the political declaration, and it could be something like know your customer, anti-money laundering, reporting of tax or other things individually. So again, permissioned, but more decentralized than a single database system, so relatively decentralized.
Does that answer your question?
That's not a full definition of what we're talking about, but we can work with this.
Maybe to add to that discussion, as a member of the European Blockchain Partnership and the member states, it was not about how we build the blockchain infrastructure, it's about how do we handle together the use cases, the cross-border use cases that there are. So you see that in many countries, there are the same problems on diplomas, on identity, on enterprise. How can we tackle that together? And to tackle that together, we also need an infrastructure. So it's based on the use cases that need some kind of things. So the collaboration on the now based on public administration is based on that. But of course, as the examples that I've mentioned, diplomas is not a use case only for public administration, it's about a bigger ecosystem. And private firms need also to be a thing. So it will be connecting national infrastructure like Alastria, like InfraChain and other many things. How can we combine them and link them in a European level? So that is, I think, the most important work of the EBSI.
I understand, of course, the narrative that you produce to reason about why you choose for this distributed technology, but the core concept of a blockchain, as we have today for 10 years, is that you introduce decentralized governance, and if you preliminary choose for a centralized or permissioned ledger structure, all the questions you just propose, for example, are we going to ask European companies to build this, can be answered with yes, because you have a traditional project now going on under the name of a distributed governance model that it's not. So the discussion really flattens with this preliminary decision to switch to distributed ledger technology instead of blockchain.
If I may, Chiara Mazzoni from the European Commission. It's a bit a parallel on what is happening in the enterprise world. So we were discussing this morning, do we have to have distributed governance as an overall goal, as a primary goal, or do we want to implement services to move fast, or not fast, but to move ahead and to have these services better delivered with a higher quality and time to market of the services or satisfaction of the client, which is the citizen, the user, compared to what we have today. And for instance, when we talk about taxations or when we talk about trades, we can imagine that if that infrastructure which is supporting the services is really successful, traders could be identified, I would say in a peer-to-peer. So it means that still traders have to identify, so there's a kind of central or more centralized gateway, but actually they can transact directly on that infrastructure. And that will be really revolutionary for services that we know today, as other services like Liquid Share try to decentralize some forms of more centralized governments that exist today. So I think the real ultimate aim is to be more decentralized, but as many enterprise projects that have started, they are not really aiming at fully distributed governance. They are not DAOs. They are projects that want to be more performant, to achieve better performance and efficiency and delivery of services or products.
And that's where my question comes from. So if we're aiming at enterprises, that's something completely different than aiming for citizens.
But in that respect, and seeing the discussion that we had about blockchain governance for citizens, what would be a real added value distributed governance for delivering services for citizens, which would not have certain forms of typical governance that we do know taken from enterprise or taken from governments. So if we talk about e-identity, how do you ensure that when you pay taxes, it's really you that pay taxes? So who's guaranteeing your identity? And in a certain way, today, I think we still have, we are not at the mindset shift that will guarantee that with a sovereign identity, for instance, you identify and your government trusts you. So I think we have to go through that path.
So I don't want us to get hung up on definitions. I think in the observatory, we've already established that there is no such thing as blockchain. There is no such thing as distributed ledger. It's shades of gray across 20 technologies that are borrowing various components to each other. So I think we shouldn't get hung up on any assumption or definition, and just each feel free to express what we feel would be the ideal governance and protocol to support the services that we just mentioned. So if you have proposals, make them, but I think let's not try to get hung up on definitions. Please, Jesus.
No, I was going to say exactly this, that the important thing is to see what are the objectives, okay, and then related to governance. And then it depends. But speaking about your question, and I would even rephrase the question saying that in reality, to me, the objective should be, can we, at the European level, at the single digital market, can create a network which is can be used for provisioning of everything and then can make more efficient the provision of the public services to citizens to companies and then companies collaborating with the public sector, because at the end this is what we need. And what is the governance model? Okay, and then I think that such a network would be more, because what should be the governance model? The one which is suited to the objective, and the objective is to improve the quality of life of citizens and the standard of living, not on decentralizing. That's not the important thing. If decentralization is good for the citizens, then right. But then, for example, one of the most important use cases is how to make more efficient existing processes. There are millions of euros being spent right now that could be used for healthcare or whatever, even in Spain. Okay, having the public administration is right now essentially decentralized. And this is a problem because we don't have the technology to make a decentralized process very efficient. It is decentralized but very inefficient. So governance model for these use cases, come on, is the public administrations. And then the private sector would trust on this if this is working. Okay, so the governance model has to provide not just the framework for making decisions, but to provide the confidence to all the participants that the decisions are taken in the right way and they are going in the right direction. And then I think that if we create altogether a public permission network initially as EBSI, with some use cases, with nodes in the governments and then on some public administrations in some countries, for example, in Spain, several nodes or whatever, and this is working. It proves that it makes the provision of digital services or services, citizen services, useful citizen services across Europe much more efficient. So there is more need for important things. This is just the right governance model. That's it. Whatever. I don't know exactly what it will be, but we need to trust on the government, on the public administrations. Okay, we need that.
I think we do not need a lot of decentralized governance here, but we should have some. We are relying a lot of data on data, and in this model we should be able to trust that the data source is correct, and we should also be able, for example, to trust the diploma even if the institution is gone. So we need some kind of independent data store. And this can be done via having a low-level decentralized governance and having higher level centralized governance. So, for example, when there are decisions about new versions of this blockchain, about updates, I don't see a problem when this is centralized in this context. But the entries should not be able to be manipulated by a central actor or by one single member state. So there, the decentralization is needed and can be achieved by simple means. Also, I wouldn't put the expectations too high, because blockchain is not just a nice common database. And it is not also because of GDPR. We can use it for verifying information, and this is possible. In my opinion, you can verify all kinds of information with hashes done in the correct way, but you cannot use it to exchange information, at least when it concerns people, and it always concerns people. So if you think about exchanging VAT information via blockchain, I wouldn't do so. I would exchange it in a classical manner, but you can validate the information exchanged through the blockchain, which is, of course, a very important step, that you can trust the exchange of information, but you have to store the information somewhere else.
Yeah, so let's distinguish a few layers, just like you did, right? So there's the project governance. There is the protocol governance, who can write what, and we'll get to that. And then there is application-specific governance, which is, again, and how you design an application, like how you reconcile VAT invoices, for example. But so starting with the first one, let me ask a provocative question, maybe building on what Jesus said, right? So let's say we need to operate some kind of infrastructure, right? We need that infrastructure to be hosted by some legal entity, otherwise no one can have contracts with that infrastructure. And so you could imagine that we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? So we are electing the European Parliament. The European Parliament has an executive branch, which is the European Commission. The European Commission has a legal identity and can contract services to various subcontractors. So if we had to run an infrastructure, couldn't we simply ask the European Commission to run it for us? Or are there alternative options that would be smarter than that?
Well, I think it's already a smart option. One of the laws of change is that most things actually don't change. And while I love the disruption narrative with blockchain, it's probably not there. We will most likely go to an evolution. So at the moment we trust most likely our not failed states in Europe. I mean, we're quite comfortable in the way we're living. So why not use the member states to host a blockchain network throughout Europe? Even if one of the states goes faulty or starts a war with another state, I don't know, we still have a lot of other states to keep the network up and running. Now, which protocol it should be is a more difficult question, as usually the protocol depends on the use case, and the use case depends on the final goal, as said, and not on decentralized governance and whatever. You want to reach a target and everything else will follow that. So you also will need to host different protocols, which means that contracting one party would be quite difficult. If you need IBM for Hyperledger, Consensus for Ethereum, DA for digital asset, then we just keep contracting. That's why I think that it's easier to ask the member states to host such a blockchain and to have an independent entity on European level to ensure maintenance through just regular contracts. The city of Antwerp, I think, has been running 7 different blockchain protocols for over 700 days without human intervention. So it is feasible to work with blockchain and to realize your goals. Thank you.
I would like to implement a network which is as decentralized as possible. This is again the same story with Alastria. So I would say that in my mind, without studying too much this, would be 1 node at least per country, in such a way that if a country has a problem, the network continues working, because this is exactly what we have seen in the past 2 years in Alastria, okay? So it's very robust. So it shouldn't be any problem. It doesn't mean that there are not any central services, okay? But in general, the network should be with the right level of decentralization. I think that this summarizes what you were saying before. It doesn't have to be extremely decentralized, but it doesn't have to be centralized. And the right level for this point in time, I would say, giving the governments the ability to run nodes, okay, validator nodes. Because then you can learn about the next steps in the future, okay? And each country can even decentralize a little bit more the infrastructure at the country level.
So as I understand, this would be the off-chain governance, mainly led by member states, because we are saying here that this would be enough for the use cases that we are aiming at. So if we dive 1 level lower when it comes to on-chain governance, what would be the structure here? So you still have the member states who would be running the nodes and would be validating here. What is the implication of the other actors, for example, government agencies inside this network? Are the member states running everything on behalf of these government agencies, or do the government agencies have a stake on that? What is your view on that aspect? And of course, you have government agencies, but then we have other stakeholders that we can talk about.
Again, this is a little bit aspirational, but I would aspire for each government running its own node, using the typical infrastructure and the typical providers for running critical infrastructure in the country. So the governments are used to run critical infrastructure, so the nodes should be perfectly managed with the current infrastructure. So, but using a common standard, so they join the network, and the network is running the same protocol and the same governance model and so on. But I would go for given some rules and some software, some operational rules, the countries are responsible for implementing those rules with the same mechanisms that they are using for implementing any other critical service in the country.
And so, for example, what would be the different levels of implications and the different classes of nodes that would be here? So, for example, we would imagine that the member state will run a validating node. Do we want to have the government agency running also a validating node, or is that something that is actually not necessary and that is redundant? Do we need to have these government agencies that are running a simple node, or do we have a service that is provided to these government agencies to connect to the network through APIs? What is your...
Okay, now I understand. Sorry, this is not to be a dialogue, but yeah, okay, I understand the question because I didn't answer the question before. Okay, it depends on the technology, so let's use this for, let's say, quorum type, or even with Fabric with the orders. I think that should be optional, so there may be governments that don't want to invest resources or then they don't have the capabilities to run a validating node or an ordering node in Fabric, so they should be able to run a regular node and that's it. So they join the network, they operate this, they know how to do this. But then, if a country is willing to take the, let's say, the responsibility and the compromise to operate according to a defined, very strict operating policy, validating node or ordering node, they should be allowed to do that, because this is a very good way to start the decentralization of the blockchain. But they have to comply with very, very strict rules. But with regular nodes, it's not so strict, because the regular node can go down and that's it. Okay? But there are governments who would be participating and then putting resources in order to do this. Okay? So I really think that if the governments, in a voluntary fashion, they are willing to take the compromise and they prove that they can do that, they should be able to do that, to run the order nodes.
I think the government should run or have somebody run in their name validator nodes. I think this is important, so they really have a stake in it. And to have a regular non-validating node should be very easy, even open to the public in the long run. So there shouldn't be a large barrier to run a regular node. And also to participate in the blockchain should be fairly easy. Of course, it has to be limited, at least in the first run, because of resources, because resources are limited, but there shouldn't be high barriers to participate.
No other point on this? Yes, sure.
Just a question to the expert audience. Are there technical limitations due to consensus mechanism that we have to take into consideration, especially for validating nodes, and how to overcome them? It's just a question of consensus mechanism selection, or is there more of technical limitation?
So actually, there may be some resources useful for that, that we can... So basically, I think that we can all agree here that there are hundreds of different flavors of consensus mechanisms, but only a few are actually used. You have some examples here on the slide, and really each of them has some specific benefits in specific context. So I think that we can probably extend your question in the context that we are describing from the beginning. Are there specific consensus algorithms that are most suited to this infrastructure in order to meet the requirements in terms of performance and the requirements in terms of governance and decentralization of the platform if need be?
Well, as we spoke before, actually, it's always a matter of trade-off. Even as presented before about the distributed governance, etc., there are also hybrid mechanisms. And I want to point out, since I said a lot the consensus mechanism, that there exists also hybrid structure about the consensus mechanism, in the sense that there exists combination of this consensus mechanism. And basically, concerning this example, there can be actually a process to select a committee that can then participate, that can then run the consensus. And usually, this first part of leader election we can call is generally done in a random fashion in order to be fair, etc., etc. Because proof of stake is not a fair mechanism to participate in the consensus. And proof of work, yes, it's fair in theory, but there is an opportunity cost that is not negligible. Then, for example, proof of elapsed time is one that is completely fair, since it's relied on random election. And then there is the consensus participation. And for scalability issues and efficiency issues, generally it's used a Byzantine fault-tolerant mechanism.
Yes, I would like to piggyback on this. I totally agree with this. But let me say something additionally. Is in our opinion, okay, especially in my opinion, there is not any single consensus algorithm which is right now, does exist, is now suitable for a case, for example, in Austria, where we want 1,200,000 entities participating in the blockchain. This is, again, aspirational, okay? And at the European level, 27 million enterprises, okay? So it doesn't exist. But why? Because, in my opinion, most of the people working on this space and researching on this space are trying to address two extremes, either public permissionless networks, how to enhance scalability and so on, and fairness of these networks, or private consortiums. And there is none working on public permission. So I would request the European Commission, okay, to direct some resources, because at the end we have the talent in Europe enough to design the right set of consensus algorithms, okay, for this specific use case. It's not a use case of healthcare or whatever. It's a public permission infrastructure suitable for any use case on top of this. This can be achieved. There is a lot of research which can be already used, but the problem is that, in my opinion, these researchers are just thinking on the extremes. Again, public permissionless or private consortiums, because public permission networks don't exist yet. And I think that they can be achieved, and we have the talent in Europe to do that. It's just setting up the priorities and the problems.
Maybe there is a reason there isn't that much research on public permission networks too, but okay. So if you build a network of trusted players, then it's not an issue to select a consensus algorithm that doesn't apply or doesn't require a lot of resources to run, because we already trust each other to a certain extent. We're not putting all our value on the streets and I require everybody to have consensus on who owns what. We're putting our valuable items on a ledger which is shared by 27 countries who we trust to a certain level. So, well, don't go too far. Like Poet is for me a good algorithm, the proof of elapsed time.
The problem is that in the real economy right now, because the idea is to put all the real economic transactions on top of a blockchain infrastructure. So if you calculate the number of millions of transactions per microsecond, not just per second, then you know that you need something else. This is not enough.
So we're going to run a project with 5 million items running a few thousand data points a minute. We're not going to put those things on blockchain. We will just store on the blockchain what is really valuable. I usually describe it as you put the truth between parties on a blockchain on a moment where there is no discussion about the truth, and you don't have to put more on the blockchain than just that. More important is where is the data stored and who will own that rather than where is the blockchain.
I'm speaking about economic transactions, not IoT or whatever, just economic transactions between companies. Now, the economy works in a very decentralized way, okay? And the consensus algorithms are very, let's say, centralized, okay? So it's just something which is really needed if we want to make more efficient the economy. It's not just an invention. Huh?
But staying in a public realm, you can imagine that an identity, a digital identity, European defined system could be helping the municipality of Antwerpen logging into a European system. So you may have thousands of local authorities, regional authorities, public agencies connecting to the system.
It's true. When we started with blockchain or Bitcoin 10 years ago, we were stuck at 7 transactions a second, and we're still stuck there with Bitcoin. But meanwhile, other technologies were developed too. I think Stellar ran a test with a few million transactions a second in a lab environment. There you can prove anything, of course. But I assume that if we think about the things we have to store on the ledger, that the simple consensus algorithm should be sufficient. It will be network latency, which will cause more problems than consensus in the end.
Can I ask
just maybe to reframe the question that was the original question. So here we are really thinking about, we have two questions, which are, what is the currently existing best consensus algorithm for the platform that we have been describing so far, mainly run by member states. And if today we are saying that there is currently no consensus algorithm that is good enough for running this type of infrastructure, what are the specifications of this consensus algorithm that needs to be researched?
Okay, so my question would be the following, and correct me if I understand you falsely. So basically what you're doing right now, right, in the solutions that you're discussing, is that you're introducing a database format between a series of 27 countries, right, an extraterritorial database between nation states that are effectively colluding, hence why we're sitting here today, right? Why would a blockchain be a suitable solution for transmitting data between trusted agents? That is just like using, I don't know, a solution, a container solution that is inefficient, expensive, and contributes nothing. So maybe you could elaborate on why exactly this blockchain has a use case in this scenario.
So maybe we can briefly clarify, I don't know if this answers your questions, but today you have systems that are IT national-based, that have to send information one to another. For instance, on traders, they want to access with their products, and where do they have to pay the VAT? At the entry, at the country of entry, or at the country of selling. This has to work, because this is in a regulation, this is how the system works to pay VAT. One of the use cases, which is just one that could be developed over this platform, would be that this information are no more sent, but that are shared on a need-to-know basis from people that need to know these information. So it's an oversimplification of what exists today. Another example is availability of financial information from enterprises that today are available only on national base. So if you search for Fiat FCA in Italy, you might find it. Then if it moved with a filiale succursale to Poland, you have to search to another database. So it's a real added value if you can get this at European level, even not talking wider.
I'm not just debating that or disputing that at all. I definitely see the value of an extraterritorial database as mentioned. However, from a technical point of view, I cannot see the value of exactly hash-based blockchain technology in this case. I mean, certainly this could be done cheaper, more efficiently, and sooner without actually running nodes between 26 trusted parties. The question is why the technical layer, why is that exactly?
It's a question of governance. Today, who's gonna decide? It's like in enterprises. Why should I choose your solution? Why Estonia should choose a Latvian or Polish solution? And why? So what the European Union is doing today is founding an interoperability framework which connects these different things and these different databases through an interoperability. Which are costly and which takes time to be implemented. If you design a system which is decentralized in the sense which is managed, more decentralized what it is in per national member states, you have advantages from the beginning, but you have to define this and to design this together from the beginning. Having a governance, having a technology choice, having a consensus protocol, a consensus mechanism that is fitting for the purpose.
And let me add something which is more extreme and is my past experience. But my opinion, if you can solve something with a central database, forget about blockchain. Now, The problem is that many times you cannot implement a centralized database because the question, even with enterprises and the private consortiums show this, is who operates the database? If you want to set up a decentralized thing, even in a country which is centralized, enterprises, okay? Even in a huge international company which could implement everything centralized, there are internal blockchain projects just to make all the entities collaborate without having to connect or surrogate or put or reduce their self-sovereignty to other entity. And this is a psychological effect, okay? And then a central database worldwide could solve all of the problems of connections about the whole thing, okay? But it's not feasible, not just for technical reasons, but for, let's say, sovereignty reasons, okay? So at the end, what you want is coordination, is to collaborate. Even in Spain, you have 17 different communities which have some databases internally and they don't want to relinquish their sovereignty. So the idea is how do you cross these things, even without moving the data, but giving guarantees to the data whenever it leaves, for example, the public administration also.
And again, the value of these solutions. However, what I'm seeing here, and from a technical perspective, right, is a very expensive principle, right? Because these agents are by definition trusting each other, right? So the only value of a blockchain, so far as I'm arguing here, I work with blockchain, so I'm not trying to step on my own feet, right? But the only value of a blockchain within the European Union, extraterritorially run by the nation states, so far as I can see, would be if one of the countries would engage in warfare with another country to protect the citizens of that country. Otherwise, I don't see. Yeah, sorry.
Maybe Jorn, before that has been waiting for a moment.
So three points. First, proof of elapsed time wouldn't be my favorite because we then would rely on chip makers that probably reside outside Europe, and I wouldn't put this very important piece in their hands. Second thing, blockchain is no free lunch, so we still have to find common interfaces, even if we use blockchain, so it doesn't relieve us from this task. Third, what's the alternative to blockchain? There are alternatives. We could use eIDAS, for example. So what does blockchain provide in this context? It doesn't provide the interfaces. It's not a free lunch. It provides the proof that data is original. And this proof is very important. It can be achieved through eIDAS as an alternative, which is also some kind of decentralized infrastructure, but it's more centralized than blockchain. So you can trust European blockchain framework a little bit more. So we can gain something from this infrastructure, but it's only the proof that things are original, especially when it's not the primary government acting, but it's some actors inside the country acting. And therefore, I think it's worthwhile to have additional proof.
Quick reply, I think we should not overestimate how Europe works, and actually that Europe and neither member states are monoliths. Even if you go at member states level, different departments have got different interests and sometimes do not share the data. So it's really valuable. Something that we are doing in Europe now is the once-only principle, where citizens can register once and then their data, under all the protection on privacy laws, can be taken back upon their consent to fill the same form or to provide another service for which they have already provided data. So don't think that when you say Europe, everybody has got everything, which is far from...
But sorry to intrude, but what if I told you that I could deliver that system at your doorstep tomorrow with a relational database and it would cost you, a fraction of building this with a blockchain?
And then I need compliance and lawyers and risk and audit, and they are very more expensive than a few people from IT.
So please, let's keep the discussion in order. I know that there are many elements to discuss, so just please respect the times of speaking. So please, Clément, go ahead.
As you just pointed out, if you have parties trusting each other, you don't need a blockchain. And so now what we have to agree on is that member states do not completely trust each other. And I know it's not necessarily nice to say it, but if it was the case, we would not be here speaking about making a consortium blockchain with member states. So member states can have a bad IT infrastructure, and even without being malicious, get hacked. Member state could put some pressure on other. If you have one member state owning the database, it could put pressure. Like if we had the database in UK leaving, that would lead to some issue. So we want to have a database which is has some kind of level of redundancy, because we don't want to take the risk of one member state or one entity misbehaving either on purpose or by being hacked or leaving the system. And that's why a blockchain is useful compared to a database. And I think the level of integration of European country and of trust is lower than what you would have in one enterprise. And that's the reason to make a blockchain.
Yes, Pierre Marot, I'm also from the blockchain team at the European Commission. I'm a bit surprised about all this discussion. When we discuss use case for companies this morning about blockchain, I mean, it was more or less obvious that there is clear added value for some project to use the blockchain. Why shouldn't it be the case for services that concern exchange between member states, but also between the member state and their citizen at European level, and also at a cross-border level, and also between companies and stuff like that. So it's exactly the same process. Let's imagine the system that we have in place, for instance, for company to declare the type of chemical products that they are using. So far, we have ways to manage that, but it's quite expensive, it's quite heavy. And so we can easily imagine that blockchain will provide added value in terms of efficiencies. And again, it was mentioned by Peteris a bit earlier. We have already proof of concept that shows that in a multi-party process concerning taxation stuff, I don't want to describe what it is exactly because it would be too long. There is already a cost efficiency around 30 to 80%. It depends about which type of users you consider. So obviously, there is already a gain for us to invest in blockchain for that. And then the challenge, as explained by Jesus, is that we need to have the road or the pipe or the network, you call it the way you want, in order to appraise more accurately what will be the value of using blockchain. And in doing so, we will also, in a way, play a steering role for public administration to adopt more advanced technology and stuff like that. So we help also to solve different issues. If we are able to solve through the EBSI the question of self-sovereign identity, or to showcase that we can use a concept of self-sovereign identity in compliance with the eIDAS regulation and stuff like that, this is then something that can be used by any type of blockchain in any organization or for any type of purpose. So that's all the justification for us to engage in this venture for developing European blockchain service infrastructure. However, at this stage, we have not yet the answer to all the questions. We are in a development mode, in a reflection mode. So we have put a governance which is here more in the concept of in a stage of development of the infrastructure itself. Then, of course, when the infrastructure will be fully operational, probably we'll have to adapt this governance in order to make it more robust, in particular regarding the liability aspect. So that's to answer your concern about why using blockchain at this.
Yes, but since I'm playing the devil's advocate, let me rephrase. My argument is the following, right? The level and the extent of supranational governance that you describe is, of course, a wonderful thing, and that's the objective, without a doubt. However, my concern is that the extent of work that is required for you to actually engage in policy and legislative debate with all the member states will lead you down a path where once you are done with signing deals and shaking hands, the actual use case for blockchain technology is obliterated in 9 out of 10 cases, because at that point you have reached a level of trust and cooperation that enables you to use relational database technology, or any of the fabulous solutions from the literature of now almost 40 years research into these topics, right? So saying blockchain doesn't make governance happen. Blockchain is just a container, right? Just a database. And it is not.
Being mindful of time, we don't have the whole evening for that, but so I think that what we are discussing here is there a benefit for some specific use cases? And the answer is clear, it's yes. Are there other solutions that are more efficient? Maybe. But one important question is to say, okay, how are we judging these different solutions? And I think that the main aspect to it is the cost. Is it reducing cost? And are there more cost-efficient solutions to answer the same problem? And so to partly answer this question, in the audience, do we have a view of the budget that would be needed in order to create such infrastructures, specifically for specific projects, but also more broadly in terms of a whole infrastructure that would serve as a backbone? Do we have views on that? And so that we can judge it in front of other solutions?
I think it's not a discussion about cost or revenue or the pricing of a European blockchain. This discussion is essentially about values and norms. If you look at a blockchain from a more abstract position, a blockchain is a codification of norms and values in society and the people that use that infrastructure by installing a node. That can be a validating node or just a participating watching node, that doesn't matter. And because a blockchain is basically a set of norms that is codified and supported by a large group of people, this discussion primarily should go about values and the norms that the people have. As we know, the norms and the values in the European Union are very different. It's probably the wrong discussion we're having here. It's the discussion about public and private blockchains, and now we have the introduction of even hybrid blockchains. That's a whole new bag of worms in my mind. You're not gonna finish the discussion ever because it's about values and norms. So maybe we should also try and discuss other aspects of governance. The reason why this is not going to end well, or why people are imagining why we're having discussion in the first place, is because this is the actual topic. And maybe we should focus on different things than this detail as on the projection screen now of implementation of blockchain. If we also take the governance discussion on a more abstract level, we should maybe focus on different things. For example, standardization of transactions. Then every member state can decide for his or her own what blockchain to join or what infrastructure to copy from another member state, and then have agreements on the transactional aspect of, for example, identity management. And then you get rid of this impossible discussion of values and norms, and you can get to the process of collaboration, in my view. And I'm interested in your comments.
So maybe the cost aspect, you're right, is not necessarily the most important. I think that what you are saying here is what value is actually created and what are the value is not answering to the point that is values, which is a different thing, but the value that is created by these solutions, and this is actually where we can judge of the interest of these solutions, and this is why we are asking of the cost of these solutions, because this is the basis that you are going to use in order to judge them. Of course, we can delve more into the philosophical aspects and how we can make sure that the different values of the different actors are aligned. I think that this is something that we have covered before. So in a very governance free and way, what do you think? What should we be talking about? Do we talk about what it costs, or do we continue to talk about these elements that you were mentioning? Very, very open. It's up to you.
I think talking about blockchain promoting democracy is a good part of marketing. So we have to really look at the use case and see what kind of advancement we do, and then see what is being achieved. I don't agree with you that we can just use a relational database. We have a project at the University of Geneva where we put diplomas or hashes of diplomas on a blockchain because we want to have a proof that's independent of the University of Geneva. So whenever you have an entity, an official entity in a country, that might go away, the proof of the information of this entity might go away. So you need something that is independent of the entities. And it's not just about not trusting and thinking they might be malicious. There might be a lot of things happening. And concerning the costs, I think the real cost is in harmonizing APIs. And this is not a free lunch with blockchain. You have to pay for it. And it's the same cost you have to burden when you don't use a blockchain. The blockchain part is only a minor part compared to the cost of harmonizing procedures and interfaces. So yes, it costs a lot, but the real cost is much higher. And having a stable, reliable basis is beneficial to it, I think.
Blockchain was sorry, no problem. Blockchain was just a technology before. Now it's a set of value and norms, and I guess it will be anything that is useful to build on belief what blockchain should be. But we heard the facts. It brings efficiency. We got the rechtech solution that add efficiency. What is wrong with looking at those numbers and thinking, hey, blockchain actually does a good job here. Let's see what it costs to implement such a solution and realize an actual goal that helps people rather than discussing things you assume a blockchain should be based on a paper written 10 years ago. What it costs, we did a few projects at Belfius already. I also worked at KBC where we did projects. It's very hard to calculate the cost, but the technical side is not that expensive. It's indeed aligning the people involved in the project to a shared set of data to exchange, to collaborate, to have a shared vision. The business alignment or the public entity alignment will be way more expensive than the technical implementation, although IBM knows how to write their invoices. So it's not for free, but on that account, I just concur with the other side.
Yeah, I fully agree with the three of you. And what I always say that the blockchain is not just the technology, is the mentality. And what I have seen in the project that I've been involved is that it helps collaboration. And you could do that with a centralized database in many cases, okay? But it's the collaboration and the setup of standards, common standards, and this is really the added value then, whether this is blockchain or not. But if you put blockchain there, it happens that the people approach the collaboration in a very different way than if you are going to say that I'm going to run the central database, by the way, you will have to connect to me and let's agree on this and you are going to use my APIs, okay? And then you would say, okay, but this doesn't make any sense. Well, this is how society works. Everyone has the needs for being sovereign, but what we need is collaboration. And collaboration is very hard. And collaboration could be solved at the European level, for example, demolishing the barriers and putting just a single state. But this is not.
And I'm super happy that you bring up the fact that blockchain has become a value system, because in a way I felt as if that is probably the best argument for my argument that you could present to me. Because if a technology becomes a buzzword or a hype word and it replaces rational consideration over what the best solution is, then that is a logical fallacy. Collaboration, as you say, is extremely difficult. And surely, if we call it blockchain and collaboration happens as a result, then I'm all for it. But then maybe we could use another technology than a blockchain while we do that.
No, because blockchain means decentralization, means that if I am going to collaborate, I'm not going to depend on anyone in this table. So it fosters collaboration because it's a peer-to-peer, not among people, but among companies. The companies are willing to collaborate in peer-to-peer, but without the blockchain, it's very difficult to do. And states.
But Uber is a peer-to-peer economy.
Uber is a centralized.
Uber connects peers and they take a cut in the middle, right?
Connects peers, but it's not peer-to-peer.
When you make a transaction on Ethereum, you pay a miners fee. When you make a transaction on Bitcoin, you also pay a miners fee. The miners are allocated in 5 to 4 pools, right? So the definition really is a question of very radical discussion of the technical benefits, the pros and the cons of each solution. My only argument is that blockchain is not always right. That's the thing.
So
almost never is right.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Jesus. We have coffee outside afterwards. We will still be able to discuss afterwards. I just want to maybe give the opportunity here for last point on this aspect, and then we have a very last question that we are going to cover quickly before we wrap this up and continue the discussions informally between all of us. So you wanted to say something, yeah?
We are talking, and it's not mentioned in the main category, but we are all talking about the blockchains, and every data will be put in the blockchain. But there are some discussions about not putting all the data in the blockchain, but there is some concept about side chains where the data is stored somewhere else, and the blockchain is just going to be used for the approval and transaction approvals, which will make blockchain less costly in the future, and it will be more efficient in any other way. So the participating governments, the other government agencies won't be frustrated about the data security and anything else, right?
Yeah, so that's a great example. Let's look at that. For example, we recently at my job worked with a sidechain solution. There's a company called POA, Proof of Authority, that's implemented a sidechain bridge to Ethereum where they run a sidechain abstraction of a token called XDAI, which is basically a much faster database that runs transactions on the stablecoin DAI that some of you might have heard of, and then relays that back to the main chain whenever that is necessary. And that's certainly a good idea. However, who runs the sidechain, right? In this case, it is Protofire, one of the building companies, and POA themselves, and then 1 or 2 stakeholders in Ethereum, right? That's effectively 2 or 3 parties running a already questionable consensus algorithm, and then relaying that back to the blockchain. This is a slippery slope from using blockchain technology, so solving a proposed problem, and then fixing holes as they appear, and then winding up with a centralized database, right? Because the solution could not be fixed with blockchain. We still call it decentralized because, it is a value set, and I'm all for that. I'm just saying another good example of why sometimes it is not the most practically correct solution to use a blockchain for some of these issues. So.
Thank you. So that was the last point.
Sorry, Ludovic. Before you move on, I just want to... In saying public network, it should say permissionless network, because those are 2 different dimensions I've pointed out before. There is one network, Sovereign, which runs on Hyperledger Indy, which is a public permissioned network, and it runs on RBFT, which is redundant BFT consensus algorithm.
You are definitely right. Thank you for pointing this out. And actually, you are going to have a few more remarks when I'm going to show you the next slide. As an open source expert, brace yourself. So thanks a lot for this discussion. I think that the very last point that we should cover before the end of the day is the one of technical governance. And the one of technical governance is what are the technological choices that you are going to make for your solution? And how are you going to decide on what new features need to be implemented inside your solution? And this is a very important question. I think that we actually don't want to dive too deep inside the first part of the question, which is about protocols. There are many protocols out there which each have their own specificities, but maybe having a view on the process that should be implemented for deciding on new features for this infrastructure that we were talking about is something that is useful. So I propose that we take 10 minutes to discuss about that. And to illustrate this point, we have here what Arnaud will destroy in a few seconds, which is some examples of governance for blockchain protocols. Again, these are simplifications of it. But most importantly, what we have to remember here is that most of the blockchain protocols are actually open source software, and Arnaud is a specialist of open source software, so he will be able to dive more into this topic. But there are specific governance models when it comes to implementing new features for these different protocols. Just to take a few examples, so most of these protocols are run by foundations, which meaning running by foundations is something that actually can differ. You can have foundations that are here to support the research, development, and education around the technology, and you can have foundations that are here to help facilitate and drive the development itself of the technology. This is, for example, the case with the Hyperledger Foundation, and I would let Arnaud dive deeper into this. But again, as any open source software, anyone can participate in the development and in the improvement of the software without being forced into any organization. So this is why you have on the left side here parallel development efforts that are undertaken by private entities or private companies. And so these are the different models. And I just want to ask, having this in mind, and as examples of governance models for implementing new features, what should be the governance for an infrastructure like we described before?
So my name is Yuri Baars. I'm lead of the blockchain team at Rabobank, involved with Combo and WeTrade, for example. I think what's really important, I think most people here are involved with applications you build on top of those blockchains. And I think because of that, you shouldn't concern yourself with this layer. I think you can influence it if there's really a desire to. I think Enterprise Ethereum Alliance tries to listen to other corporates requiring certain features. I think that's the way to go. But I think, if you're working on an application like WeTrade and Congo, you just should concern yourself with the governance of your own applications instead of the really low level specifics like on the slide.
Yes, regarding the European blockchain, there are a few points I would like to put under light. Most administrations and municipalities have difficulties. It's very hard for them to get technicians, just normal IT people to work for them. That's the first issue, and it's even worse when it comes up to blockchain. So implementing blockchain will have them, I don't think they will be able to handle it. So that blockchain, we should only use, I think, blockchain for a very small part and try to use as much possible legacy IT technology as possible. And the blockchain part should really be a teeny one. And another thing is, I think maybe we should reach out to municipalities and local governments, because there is something we noticed in a few countries. Municipalities, federal government has built technology and local authorities don't want to use it. They say because they just want to take control. So they are building their own infrastructure on the side, and they are not using the ones provided by the federal government. And we could face the same issues here. So maybe we should have a few sessions to talk with them and try to get them involved. Otherwise, they might just say, we're not using it, we're building our own. Thank you.
So Arnaud, should I assume that the slides are almost correct?
Yeah, there's a slight error, but it's minor enough that I can pass over it. It's all right. It's not so bad.
Thank you. Yes.
I think that last comment was extremely important. We are seeing a tendency of cities becoming stronger actors, taking the role of branding, running their own platforms, using their own technology, like smart cities. And it's really important to take in consideration the possibility to scale. I don't know if to scale, but to level these kind of technologies if we want them to be applied at a municipal level. And I just wanted to say that I really think this is an important issue.
No, I agree with the previous speakers. But regarding governance of this, I think this picture, which is very good, displays something. There is one thing which is the protocol, okay? And for example, in the case of Alastria, we are using right now the two on the left, okay? But we just use it as it is. You can try to influence or whatever, but in reality, the decision process for evolving the protocol is in those communities, it's not in Alastria. Right. But then with, for example, the software of Fabric, you can build many different types of consortiums, private consortiums, and right now a public permission network with a different governance. So the governance for the network doesn't have to be related at all to the governance of the protocol evolution. And for us, both are important, but the biggest problem for us is the governance of the network and, as I said, the liabilities. And we don't have all the answers. Okay, so we would like to know about them.
Thanks a lot, Jesus. And I just want to mention so that it's clear in everyone's mind that it's not because the institutions or companies are using a specific technology that they are completely tied to the choices that are made on specific protocols. Just to take an example, it's not because there are decisions that are being taken for the implementations that are directed to the Ethereum mainnet that the private implementations are impacted, and this is also true for other elements. So this slide was really to showcase a few examples of governance for protocols. And again, this doesn't mean that the governance of these protocols really directly impact the technical governance of the projects. So if you have any closing points to make on what should be a proper governance for taking the technical decisions inside projects, this is the moment to share them.
So WeTrade is built on Fabric. Comgo is built on Quorum. I think every choice you will make today will be different in 1 week or 1 year. So I think it's really important to take into consideration is that it's still in development and that you actually have to design for change. I think that's also quite difficult to incorporate into the governance of everything. How do you do this? Yeah, so this is actually quite a challenge. So we're actually looking into ways to abstract the technical layer. We're actually hoping to start with making a module for identity solutions. And actually we found out by wanting to develop a blockchain agnostic identity module, it actually became a technology agnostic identity module because a lot of the mechanisms we are trying to implement with blockchain are already possible with existing solutions. I think that's actually quite interesting. And yeah, I hope to release more about that to the public really soon because I really feel that everyone wants to solve the identity problem, but because everyone's trying to solve it by themselves and not joining forces, it's really hard for also us as a user of the identities which are available, what are we going to focus on? Because especially for us as bank, it's quite costly for us to pay attention to all developments.
the good piece of news, it will not solve everything, but it's that EBSI is working on identity at European level. And we face very much the same issues that you're mentioning.
Yeah, I was going to say that this is, I think, the right approach. Of course, it's impossible to design a blockchain interface or an interface for every use case, but for specific use cases. And we have done something like a regulatory workflow, for example, in Spain, with banks and the regulator and so on. And for the specific use cases, the idea is you have to abstract the functionality, and then you can implement this on top, and we did the implementation on top of Quorum and Fabric, and by the way, on top of Oracle would be just a very minor thing. And again, with the same philosophy. Whatever can be out of the blockchain has to be out of the blockchain and put on the blockchain just the things that are really adding value to non-blockchain technologies. Otherwise, don't use the blockchain. Okay, that's the rule. And then abstracting the use cases is something difficult, but in EBSI, it's not identity, but it's diplomas, for example. Diplomas is, again, about data model standardization of APIs is going to be simple, so this implementation could be on top of any possible blockchain in the future or a centralized database.
So is it conceivable that if the European blockchain infrastructure were to operate with different consensus mechanisms according to the use case, to nevertheless have one and the same governance for the technical revision of these algorithms, or would you have to design a different technical governance per consensus mechanism you're using per use case?
So I think that when it comes to technical governance, you have two main elements to choose from. The first one is what technology are you using in the first place? And this decision has to be taken by a governing body inside the organization based on the best options that are offered. And so these include choosing the best suitable consensus algorithm. And then you have a second aspect that you have to decide on, which is, in the long run, how are you going to implement updates on your solution and decide on technical priorities for new features. That could include changing the consensus algorithm if need be. And so for these two elements, actually what you really need is to have a governing body that is responsible for making the technical choices. That could be a technical steering committee. That could be anything else in terms of governance. But there is actually no need for having multiple entities unless you really want to have a specialized subgroup that will be looking into these elements. Thank you, Roses.
Hi, Roses. Thank you.
Yeah. So, actually, I think that as some people are leaving, this might be a good time to conclude for the day. Yes.
Yeah. No, just a general remark. We have talked a lot about EBSI. There are now technical groups, policy groups, use case groups are now forming with representatives of the member states. They will be helped by experts, but there will be also stakeholder moments where the findings, the learnings, the semi-conclusions will be also challenged with people and audience like you. So this is not a one-time moment. The member states will be in interaction with the different stakeholders to form that conclusions and to challenge what kind of technical solution there will be. So that's the work that we will be doing in the coming year. I'll give you some insight.
Yes, please.
Also to add regarding the last slide, I mean, it's not the intention at this stage to develop a new protocol. It's more to use what exists already and probably different one. But we have not the intention to replace the Ethereum Foundation or Hyperledger initiative and stuff like that. So.
Not because of lack of intent or the truth. I was trying to make a joke, but this fell flat. Trying to make a new joke. Shall we have a full week to discuss everything that is left about governance. I think that we covered today many aspects, but I think that there is a lot to discuss still. And so just to give you a bit of visibility on what is happening next. So this workshop will lead to a workshop report that will be basically summarizing all the discussions that happened today, and that will serve as a basis for a thematic report that will be then produced by the observatory with the collaboration of you, the people in the room, and the two working groups, of course, of the observatory and forum. Of course, this paper might not answer all the questions. That would be something that I don't think we are capable of with the current state of the discussions. But anyway, I would encourage everyone to go on the forum and continue the discussions there if you find interesting articles that you want to share and that you want to discuss here. And please feel free to engage with us and with all the members that are here in the room on these different topics. As next steps, digital assets and use cases in healthcare sector. I hope that you enjoyed the day here with us during this workshop, and I hope that we will see some of the faces that are here in the room during these next workshops. Thanks a lot again for your participation. Sometimes it gets a bit messy, but that's what it gets when some passion is in the room. So thank you very much for your participation, and looking forward to see you again.